Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever is appropriate, wherever you are in the world and whenever you're listening. This is the Food Fight Podcast. I'm Nell Shamrell Harrington. I'm a senior engineer at Chef. I'm working on the Habitat open source project mainly, also co host of this podcast. And joining me today is my co host, Nathan Harvey. Nathan, how are you today?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Nell. How about yourself? How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day here in Seattle. We've had very much a mix lately, but today is shaping up to be a beautiful day, so I am quite happy.
All right, that's awesome. Well, I'm coming to you live today from my home office in Annapolis, Maryland. The kids are home from school, so who knows? We might get interrupted. There might be something fun happening over my shoulder throughout the episode. That's just how it goes.
Kind of par for the course, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hashtag work from home life. Awesome. Well, also joining me today are Charity Majors. Hi, Charity. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Charity. I am co-founder and CEO of Honeycomb. Worked at Parse and Facebook and a bunch of other places. I like database. I hate databases. Same thing. And my new project is Observability for software engineers.
Awesome. Well, it is great to have you, Charity. And also introducing us are Jamie Osler. I hope I said that right. Hi, Jamie. How are you today?
Hi, good. I guess I'm an engineer at Intercom. We have a messaging platform to help businesses and customers connect, and I work on the foundations team, or the foundations org, a few different teams there, but right now I'm focused on developer productivity.
Welcome. Well, we are thrilled to have you both on this show. And for those of you who are watching this live or even after, throughout the show or after the show, you can join us in the Chef community Slack. If you have questions, comments, etc. about observability, hop on into the Food Fight channel in the Chef community Slack and go ahead and ask away. And we just might feature your question or comment while we're live on air. So a few announcements before we dive into today's topic, which is observability. ChefConf is, of course, coming up. It is May 22nd through 25th in the beautiful city of Chicago, Illinois. I'm looking forward to it. Right now, early bird tickets are on sale. That's special early bird pricing. They are on sale until April 20th. Go ahead and get yours today. And this, we are excited to announce, there is a special buy four ChefConf tickets, get one free going on. If you'd like to take advantage of this, say you're on a team and a whole bunch of you want to go to ChefConf and you want to get one of your tickets free, you will need to register all at once. Just make sure you choose the group registration option when registering. And if you have any difficulty with this, feel free to reach out to Chef on Twitter. All right. Well, that is the announcements and the introductions. So let's go ahead and dive into today's topic of observability. And I'd like to start off the question with, what is observability? It makes me think of the Heisenberg principle, but I think it goes a little bit more beyond that. So Charity, why don't you take us away?
Yeah, totally. So if you read Wikipedia, as I always do, it tells you that it comes from control theory and it blah, blah, blah. I don't actually remember what it says. But when I think about applying to software systems, to me it means that you can understand what's happening inside your system just by asking questions and observing from the outside, right? And then you don't have to ship new code every time you want to answer a new question. And this has a lot of really interesting ripple effects that kind of contradict the way that we have historically done all of our monitoring and like gathering of data. Another way of looking at it, I think, is to say that, like, the monitoring, right, we have 20 years of best practices built up, and they're really about answering questions. You know, it's about known unknowns. It's about, you have an outage, you identify it, you write monitoring checks for it, you look for those symptoms that happen again, you build up this bank of knowledge over time, and you use that in conjunction with, you know, your intuition, your model in your head, and these dashboards on the wall that represent various states of your system, right? And this has taken us a really long way, but we kind of have this exponential jump in just complexity of systems where the range of potential outcomes or potential answers is so much bigger than it used to be for all these things. It's become much more a game about unknown unknowns, where, like, you have your tools to answer questions, but you don't actually know what the question is. And if you know what the question was, you could sure as hell answer it. But what is the question? Because all you have is some random reports coming from various corners of the internet or your developers, and are they reliable? You don't know, and you're just trying to like knit them together into a cohesive story. And that is what observability is for.
Gotcha. So if my metrics are telling me the answer is 42, but I don't know what the question is, it's probably not going to be that helpful to me. It sounds like.
Yeah, Jamie, how would you define it?
Yeah, I guess I would kind of simplify it to being able to figure out the thing system. So I know for us, sometimes we, like you said, we don't know what we're going to ask in the future, and I don't know what one of my colleagues is going to ask. That's for sure. So if we can help them with a system that is very observable, then they don't need any help from an expert in the system or something to ask a question of it. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's about finding the right level of abstraction, right? So you're surfacing the right level of not too much. It's a pet peeve of mine when people say, well, just graph everything. And I'm like, everything? Really? Your critical path is far more important than like literally everything. And if you have too much data, it can be even harder to find the bits that actually matter. Like the critical path is far more important than the rest of it. You just have to think critically about like where to capture what data so that you can answer the widest range of problems that you might someday have without having to ship new code.
It reminds me a little bit. I remember I saw a documentary on the CIA's search for bin Laden, and a CIA analyst said, people have been asking me constantly, how could you not connect the dots? But the problem is we're trying to connect the dots on a paper where there's so many dots, it's all black. Yeah, exactly. There needs to be some meaning for particularly today's information age for us to garner anything from it.
And this is where I feel, so we have an industry that's built on metrics, right? Now there's two definitions of metrics. There's metrics, just a general term for data, right? Fine. And then there's the metric, which is a single number, right? Maybe with some tags appended to it that we use. And this is like the fundamental of like all of our graphs and our dashboards and our metric, our monitoring systems. But what you've done with that to reduce everything that happened to that one number is you've thrown away all the context. You've thrown away all of here's a thing that happened. Here's what the system looked like when it happened. Here are all the attributes of this thing that happened, which is the most powerful thing that you can possibly debug with, right? And this is how our brains work. This is how the world works. There are things happen to your system. And if you're throwing that all away and all you have is these time series aggregates of metrics, all these numbers that are disconnected from all context, you can't actually answer very interesting questions about your system or what happened.
Yeah, and you can't even discuss problems or solve problems from first principles, which is often really important to like really look at a problem and break it down.
Yeah, and additionally, like with metrics, because all you have are these tags, you can't handle high cardinality data. And I get really frustrated with, if you Google high cardinality data metrics, you get all this advice about how not to have high cardinality problems, which is really not the point, because literally all of the information you're ever going to care about has high cardinality. If you're looking for a needle in a pile of needles, right? What is interesting and useful in data? Is it like the needle is silver and pointy? You don't. And when I say cardinality, I mean like say you have 100 million users. Highest cardinality is going to be any unique ID, right? Last name, first name, somewhat lower cardinality, but still quite high. Gender will be pretty low cardinality, and like species, I assume, will be the lowest of all. So like, what is interesting here? It's all of the information over on this side that's like lots of unique possible values. And all of our tools that we've developed for the last 20 years don't support that.
Right. So with some of the older tools, we try to throw away that context so that and why do we throw away that context? Is it because
hardware was so expensive? Scarcity. It was scarcity. It was pure scarcity. We're just like, how much can we throw away and still understand anything about our systems? But also, it was useful back then because, we weren't using distributed systems. We were using a LAMP stack, right? And LAMP stack, okay, everybody's using the same database, same pools of services, cool, right? If you have a 99.5% uptime, about 0.5% of the time, anyone's getting a randomly assigned error, right? But with newer systems, we've done all this stuff to like spread it out and partition it. If you have a 99.5% uptime, more likely that most of your users have 99.99% uptime, but like everyone whose last name starts with SHI thinks you're 100% down because their shard is offline, But it's going to look exactly the same in these time series aggregates and dashboards. You really have to have the ability to drill down by every high cardinality grouping of events.
Yeah, and with all that context, if we have it all, like it can be too much context, right? So it can be overwhelming as well. So what are the strategies that you have or the tactics to make that consumable?
Jamie, you want to take it?
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple of types of things that we look for when we're deciding what to expose to make something observable. And I guess the key things are, what does your business care about? Where's the bottom line? Does this thing cost you, is it costing you money? Is it critical to the business? If not, then does it matter? Maybe not. And then on top of that, there's kind of like the usual suspects, like maybe host CPU or, if you're using some distributed system like shard number, things like that. So the things that vary in interesting ways, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that you don't want to incentivize people to not add detail to your context, but most of it is very rarely going to be useful. But you don't want to not capture it because you can't predict when it is actually good. Think of all the TCP stats, the kernel TCP stats. Like for years you might not use them, but God damn it, someday you're going to want them to be there, right? But that's not the first thing you look at, right? So when you're talking about teasing signal out of all this noise, we have a philosophy that is kind of different from other people's. Everyone in the industry is chasing over each other's tails to like raise money to do machine learning, right? And to like, artificial intelligence will save you from your alert volume. I honestly, just delete all your alerts. That will save you from your alert volume. But the thing that our approach is much more social, right? Like, what do I care about when I get paged? If I get paged about Cassandra, right? Oh, fuck, I don't know anything about Cassandra. We had an outage about this, maybe a couple weeks ago. Who was on call then? Oh, Christine was on call. I'm going to go look at what she did, right? I'm going to look at what questions she asked. And of the questions she asked, what are the conclusions that she came to? What did she think was meaningful enough to post to Slack? What comments did she leave herself? Because like, then I can jump to within like spitting distance of the actual answer, even if it's a completely different answer, just because it's like it wears grooves in our systems, right? When things break in certain ways, just being able to not forget everything that we do as a team is a lot of what we think about. It's so cognitively expensive to come up with these answers from scratch, to like debug, to learn the TCP IP stack, to answer some obscure question. It's so incredibly costly, and it's so cheap to share. It's so much cheaper to just not forget as much.
I think what I'm hearing a little bit is that it's crucial in gathering metrics to also have context for those metrics.
Well, literally you can't with metrics, which is why we prefer events. And when I say event, what I mean is like a structured log that doesn't necessarily get written to disk, right? Just a data blob that has all the context. And what you're saying with event is you're saying, here's all the information that I have about this thing that occurred and the system, what it looked like when the thing occurred. Yeah, so, it's just powerful. Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask, like, when we think about observability and the tools that provide observability for us, who are those tools for? Are they for the SREs? Are they for the application developers? Are they for the business? If we're capturing things that the business care about, who are these tools for?
I think for everyone. I think there's different ways you can approach using these tools. You can use them in a very reactive manner. So if something is broken, how do I figure out what's wrong with it? But you can also use them proactively. So say you decide one day to dig into your API statistics and say, okay, so maybe I can look at all the people who are getting rate limited by our APIs. I can break them down by customer. And then I'm good at pattern matching because I'm a human, and I can see that certain customers have big spikes at certain times a day. Maybe they're having a really poor experience with your company, your service. So you can reach out to them proactively and say, hey, like, maybe if you spread out these requests, or we can work with you to change your rate limits or something like that. So there's a lot of different ways you can use it, and a lot of different parts of the business that can use it too.
Monitoring was so biased towards things being broken, right? And alerts. Like, what's the cardinal rule is every alert must be actionable, right? Everything you monitor for must be actionable. And observability, like Jamie was saying, is much more, it's just about asking questions. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're exploratory, sometimes they're business related. I feel like we talk about silos a lot, right? Well, what builds a silo? It's the boundary of your tool, right? When you stop being able to speak the same language or use the same tool, you lose that shared reality. And I think it's incredibly important that we build tools that are simple enough that anyone who's technically literate can participate in them.
So Jamie, I mean, I know that you at work are focusing on observability, but I imagine that there was a time in your career where you weren't, where you were doing just monitoring and reacting. And I wonder if there were things that either new practices or things that have surprised you as you move into this realm of really thinking about observability instead of just monitoring.
Yeah, definitely. We used to have we had a few different monitoring solutions, and one of the problems that we would have was being able to store this high cardinality data. And for a while, we tried to store in Graphite on our own. It didn't work. And our kind of internal name for these were per app metrics, and app being like a customer. And we found it really difficult to get insight into particular customers and what they're doing. So it was almost impossible. We just didn't have that layer, and people would just write off issues saying, "Oh, we can't figure this out. We don't have the tooling to do this." But now we do, and people are learning new things all the time, from how our systems are scaling to particular customers.
Jamie, you did something recently internally too, right? For your developers with the unit test or something?
Yeah, so we kind of brought this observability not just to our production systems, but also our developer productivity tooling and related things. So we have internal tools that our developers use on their desktops all the time. So now we have a better understanding from those tools, like what tasks they're running, how long they're taking, what errors they're encountering. So that lets us really prioritize time in fixing those. And also for our test setup, it allowed us to break down where time was spent in our testing per file, per test, per bucket in our CI providers. And that gave us some insight into kind of how best to change our end-to-end CI test time. And we took it from like 20 minutes to 3 minutes based on that.
That's so awesome. We always tried to do that at Parse, and we didn't have the right tools.
Yeah. And we continue to ratchet that down. Like we can see, oh, this test is a bottleneck. We can assign people to open it.
So in having those tests in there, does this mean we need to reconsider the way applications are built? I mean, do we need to start constructing observable applications from the beginning?
Oh boy. Yes, I really feel this is the next stage of the CI/CD revolution, is extending. So we ship code and we have it, it's in our mind, it's like a line that we draw, right? We ship the code, it's in production now. I really think that's the wrong frame. I feel like we should be thinking of it much more like the fourth trimester, like in human development. You know, most mammal babies are born and they go toddling off to like procure their own food. Human babies are helpless, little screaming creatures. They're not ready to be on their own, which is how you should feel about your software, you know? And the fact is that like we ship code and we wait to get paged, which is insane. Like it's not ready, right? It needs to be, you know, gated, it needs canaries, it needs to be rolled out, feature flags, whatever, depending on what it is. But what it definitely needs is you looking at it, right? I feel like you need muscle memory. I'm shipping something. Did it do what I expected it to do? Did it do anything obviously different? We don't have this muscle memory because we haven't had the tools to actually let us inspect it, right? What is one very high cardinality field? Well, it's a monotonic, infinitely incrementing build ID, right? If you could just break down by the build IDs and go, oh, compare these, you know, latency endpoint here per build ID, it's very simple to see the consequences of what you have deployed. And I think that, you know, we've been doing the observability and stuff for a while, but I really feel like this is the future of it, is just extending your visibility off your laptop, off of your test servers and into production, so that you can have software owners, not operators.
Right.
Well, and that, Charity, honestly, it sounds like you're asking the way that applications are developed to be different. And I kind of liked that time in my life where I could write code and throw it over the wall, and then it was just done. Like I shipped it.
Did you though? Did you? Whoever was responsible for your code didn't.
Right.
There might be voodoo dolls of you somewhere, Nathan. You enjoy doing that.
Nice. It's always nice to do things with no consequences.
For sure.
It leads to great outcomes.
Well, so I'm sure you run into that sort of pushback though when you're working with teams, and what are the things that you're doing to help people sort of understand that yes, you threw it over the wall and it was consequence free, but it actually wasn't consequence free.
It wasn't. You were paying for that for years, you know? And part of it is just making visible things that have been invisible. Part of it is valuing people's time, no matter who those people are. Because it is just a fact that the person who wrote it is the best person to fix it if it's within, a week or so. It's incredibly inefficient to stretch that out over months when you've paged all that knowledge out to disk, when you can, and then the users suffer. It's just like, there's all this pain that is invisible to you if you're the one just lobbing it over the wall. So, I think that and I will have to say this, as someone who comes from operations, we are completely complicit in this because we have not valued our own time for a long ass time. We've abused ourselves. I don't see how any of us can go, yeah, join us over here in ops where we love waking up at 3 a.m. It's not okay. I'm over 30. I'm really done with that part of it. But it doesn't have to be that way. If management prioritizes, fixing things, if people have, I know your favorite word is empathy, but like if you're just like feeling each other's pain and going, okay, maybe this isn't going to ship because we're going to fix this. The most important metric you can possibly track is how often is your team getting woken up or interrupted outside of business hours? And just watch it. It is every time that happens, you should postmortem it because that is not diabetes. That is a heart attack. And you're just accumulating heart attacks if you let that keep happening to your team. You'll burn them out. They'll quit. They should. This is not necessary. I have built teams I have dug teams out of this pit. If you value people and their time and their sleep, it's not a death sentence. It can be a badge of pride. You built something that you're willing to support because it is that good.
I guess it works both ways as well, right? If you empower people to have more kind of observability in their system, then it's easier for them to do that. And they feel like they don't have to have the expert knowledge.
So frustrating using the tools that we've had where you're just like, I've got log files and I've got aggregates and maybe NTP was off. So the time, it's impossible, which is why Ops has been this specialized expertise in just interpreting these fucking graphs for you. I feel strongly.
That's good.
So how about on the business side? So, if you're going to spend time working on building out features or building observability into the application, how do we go to the business or the product owners and convince them that this is time that is well worth us investing in because of what it's going to lead us to on the other side?
I guess you can say everything from if we work out where the most expensive, slowest parts of our stack are, and maybe we can gain some insight into why they're slow, maybe we can improve them and just turn off a bunch of servers, right? Save a load of money. Or we can improve the experience for these customers. We can offer it to bigger customers. We can go quicker. But all of these things are kind of related to it.
Yeah, and I mean, even like the straight up product features, like you want to know if they're being used, right? You need to know like how much additional revenue are you getting as a result of this thing that you shipped? There are so many interesting questions to be asked that help you develop and build in a more data-driven way, right? I feel like this is a very democratizing movement, putting the power in the hands of the people so that they can make better decisions about what to do with their time. They're not just receiving an assignment from someone who decided this, who didn't have any better data than you, but just, I feel like this is a very positive, very empowering movement.
I know as an engineer, in some jobs I've worked, one of the most frustrating things for me was when an exec or someone else higher up who wasn't directly, connected to the code, wanted us to change something significantly because of a gut feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, I am an engineer. I work I work with data. if someone's going to assign that much work to me, particularly because I have to divert from other work that was already in progress, I want there to be some sort of hard data or even soft data, just data behind why we're making that change.
Yeah. And then maybe you can come back with your own data and go, okay, I see your data, I counter with this. But at least then you're having a conversation about reality, right? Which is not where you started out.
And so one of the things that keeps coming up is you have this ability to ask new questions. And presumably, like, I can't wake up tomorrow and say, okay, we're now an observability shop. So there's something I have to do. There's some steps I have to take. And it seems to me like one of the first steps would be to start thinking about what are the types of questions that I want to ask. And so how do you start coming up with those so that you can start building that?
I mean, the entry point for a lot of people is just you need to ask the same question, but for different users. Jamie, you were talking, sorry.
Yeah, so I would say it's less about thinking about the questions you want to ask, more that what data is interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, the entire point is you can't predict the questions, right?
Right. So the data point that's interesting to me, if I put on, my CEO hat, the data point that's interesting to me is how much money is coming in. So how much sales are happening. And so if I just care about that top line number, to me that feels like a metric. So can you help me understand the difference between that and
so that's a number, but it's a sum, right? It's a sum of a column in all of your events, right? And if you don't have those events to sum up, then you can't break it down, slice and dice it to see what the new makeup of revenue is that's coming in, in that spike. All you have is the number if you can't break it down into events. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And then I guess it leads me to another question. Like if that number is as big as I want it to be or bigger, then I don't really care. So like how it breaks down, or I might not care about how it breaks down.
I'm not a CEO to say that. That's enough money. We can go home now. It's fine.
Yeah, like that's all I wanted. Just that. Yeah. That was the nugget. That's it. We hit it.
Terrific. But maybe the top level number is good. Maybe it's high, but the composition of your customer base is changing, and it's actually like a warning sign at this point. Like you don't know if you can't slice it down into the events and the users and the shopping carts and the like every other. There's some data involves playing with it. It really does.
Yeah, and you might think people are buying your product because of this feature, and you spend a lot of money supporting this feature, but they're not. They're actually using it for something completely different, or in a way you haven't anticipated, or maybe the people that are paying you the most use it in a particular way, and maybe that's something you actually want to look at.
Or maybe you're like, oh, we're scaling so great. Oh, wow, our database is about out of capacity. But in fact, 95% of the write lock is being consumed by one customer who's paying you $200 a month. And you actually just want to throttle that customer.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. Familiar. I know. Shocks are just going down everyone's spine right now. It's like, yeah, been there.
So there's this new term I've been seeing go around Twitter a little bit for referring to observability. I originally thought this was a new gamer abbreviation that I didn't know. But as you know, accessibility is A11Y. I'm now starting to see observability sometimes be O11Y. Any thoughts on that? Does that just show this is starting to gain mainstream Twitter fame, or what do you think?
Characters, I'm just saying. I just think it's really cute. I like to see it Ollie. We're doing an OllieCon, our first ever observability little unconference in August. Jamie, you've got to come out for this. And it's exciting to me because we're running this, but it's not really a honeycomb event. It's much more just an acknowledgement of we've been coasting on 20 years of monitoring best practices here, and we need to, as a community, come together and figure out what's next. How do we deal with unknown unknowns? Are my guesses about what makes it observable? I believe structured data, all these things that I believe. Is that the answer? I'm sure there are many things that I haven't thought about, and I really want to have this very vigorous debate and war stories and hear from people who are kind of pushing the boundaries of how do we deal with these complex distributed systems, and how do we understand them, and how do we deal with them? How do we get software engineers to really own their services, and how do we empower them and make it exciting and interesting and fun? There's there should be so much dopamine involved in this, just like the dopamine of, oh, I found that thing I didn't know existed, before my customers complain, before I get woken up. It's like solving puzzles. Like any of us who got into this to build software like this sort of thing a lot. And once you can finally answer those questions, it's just intoxicating to follow the breadcrumbs where they lead you, and you're accidentally becoming an engineer as you do. So I really want to tap into that joy.
That's cool. Earlier this week, we had an episode on incident management. And so I think that this kind of plays right into that and follows along the theme. So we've figured out that something was wrong, and we've gathered the right people. And so I think it feels like observability and the tools in this space can really help with that. I also feel like some of the things that you're saying, though, is that maybe everyone is using the same tool set instead of, you have your network engineers that are looking at their charts and graphs. And I know this has probably never happened to anyone that's listening, but you get an alert that says, hey, something is busted, and you go and you look at your graphs, and they're all green, and you say, no, you're wrong. Everything is working fine.
Or everything spiked at the same time, or everything dropped at the same time. No, I feel like there's so many of these tools exist because of our history of scarcity, because of our history of the expensiveness of hardware. You had your 64 meg hard drive, like you couldn't just store a log there, it was way too expensive. And we kind of operate out of this mindset of scarcity instead of, and we're also really bad at sampling. I really do strongly believe that teams that can speak the same language, which means you have to have a pretty low level of abstraction, right? But it's super feasible. We built it in 2 years. It's not that hard, I want more people to build things the way we're building. This is better. One thing I will say is that how the best debugger in your system is always the person who's been there the longest. I say this with love because I love being that person. I have a God complex. I love to be the person who's always debugging. But you do it by looking at your dashboards and just taking this enormous submerged iceberg of context and knowledge and systems in your head because you were there when it was built, and you built, takes all this intuition, scar tissue, and you just go, oh, it's Redis. You just jump straight to the answer. Well, I've now worked on 3 teams where that was not the case, which is kind of depressing, honestly. When you realize you join a team, you can never be the best debugger until that guy dies, right? I've now worked on 3 teams that were not the case at Facebook and Parse and here, where after 3 to 6 months of getting to know the systems and the tools and the data, like the best debugger is the person who is the most curious, the most persistent, the most interested, the most context into the product, the one who cares the most. And I think that that's because, like the newer event-based systems, they're taking all of that context out of your head and putting it in the tool, so that instead of like having you jump straight to the answer on your dashboard, you ask a small question, you look at the answer. Based on the answer, you ask another question, and you're following the breadcrumb trail where it takes you. This is not new computer science. They've been doing it in BI forever, right? We don't have this in systems land, and it's insane. And the pathologies are everywhere when you look for them. I really believe that in order to scale our human teams, we have to kind of relearn this lost art of debugging rather than just dashboard surfing.
Right.
Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's okay to have multiple tools. I don't think there's like one tool that's ever going to fit everything, but they should fit at different kind of layers of abstraction. So if you get paged, you might get paged for some reason, like a bunch of 500s coming in. The problem might actually be you've run out of disk on some downstream service, but you're not going to just log onto all your machines straight away and check the disk, right? So you're going to need something at a high level of abstraction to kind of give you an area and where to look, what kind of problem it is, does it affect all customers, and that will give you some kind of insight that previously you would had to go to someone who had seen this happen before and said, oh no, it's disk on this machine. But then you can like take that knowledge and go and look at other more specialized tools kind of in detail at lower levels of abstraction if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
So what tools or what sort of products are gaining traction in observability? I mean, I imagine Honeycomb is on that list, but what are some others that you're seeing become more mainstream?
So tracing is also, like all of the things that I've been saying about the world, they basically accept the exact same worldview. But Honeycomb is very breadth first, and tracing is very depth first. So nothing. You start with Honeycomb, find something. And with tracing, trace everything, trace it through the stack for that thing. Those are really the only ones that I'm aware of that are very forward-facing. There's a lot of aggregation still going on. There's a new startup in this space every month, and I read this as nobody's very happy with their options.
Yeah, I would say look for tools that let you break down by request even. So there are a bunch that do that kind of tracing stuff as well. And even that, it's not representative. Like Honeycomb, like I said, is very breadth first, but it does give you an idea. You can sometimes dig in and say, hey, we're spending twice as much time on a database for some reason. So things like that as well.
You have to have high cardinality. You just have to. If without high cardinality, it's not observability, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. So does that also mean that if I think back to, say, the days when I was monitoring and alerting on systems with Nagios, one of the things that I could do is go out to the internet and find a plugin for Nagios that I could plug in and then start monitoring things, right? And alerting based on those. And with a system that really cares about that high cardinality and really cares about the business metrics, does that mean that we don't have that same opportunity to sort of share the tooling that we've built within a community?
The code that you're using. I mean, I see this as being very embedded in the software that you're writing. There's stuff that you can helpers. We've written a bunch of helpers for, like, if you have MySQL and you want to inspect the data of Mongo, for like things that are off the shelf, that certainly exists. But the really beating heart of it is the software that you're developing and shipping every day.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't. So you wouldn't just grab tests from the internet and like download them and run that, right? Because they have to be specific to your business use case. So the same thing I think applies.
Can we trick developers into writing more observable applications by telling them that they're doing better test-driven development?
I would call it odd observability-driven development.
I like that.
No, but seriously, like test-driven development is like a very stunted version of observability-driven development, because it's like it passes the tests, cool. But that's not actually telling you jack shit about how it's going to perform when talking to real users with real data sets, real databases, real services hopping the real intranet. It doesn't tell you that, and you really want to put it in production early and often and look at it there. And it's a more advanced version of test-driven development.
Right. Yeah, we spend a lot of time in Intercom, time and effort, making sure we can ship it as often and as quickly to production as possible, because your code doesn't matter at all unless it's like being run. So that's all important.
Awesome. So who are the people to follow on Twitter and such if I want to learn more about observability? I'm sure you two are on that list, but what other kind of influencers are you seeing in this space?
Copy Contract, Cindy. She's great. She's written a bunch of pieces.
Is it Brian Schwartz, Vivid Cortex? Has done
Brian Schwartz is great. Yeah. There's a bunch of people who do tracing stuff. Rakyll is another. I think she works at Google, but she's great. Who else? Yeah, there are not many people who are talking about it, honestly. I'm sure I'm missing some. I can do this later.
Well, if you think of some, we can definitely add them to the show notes later.
Sure.
And Jamie, how did you discover observability, and how did you at Intercom get started with it?
Yeah, I think we were like I mentioned with these per customer metrics, we were just frustrated that we just had no way to answer these questions. So we'd done a bit of reading around, like looking at a few of the white papers from Facebook about I forget the name of their thing, and then we saw this Honeycomb thing, and we knew Charity from some of the past stuff we'd used and so on. We're like, this actually solves the problem like we have right now. And so we tried it out on a small service to begin with, where we could, we wouldn't have to make large scale changes to get this in. Didn't have to ask much permission. And then we immediately were able to use those insights. And then that was kind of like the moment when everyone went, you can actually figure out, like, not even per customer, but per customer's end user, what's going on, and people's minds were blown.
Yeah, there's this aha moment. We've all just grown up assuming these things were impossible, and we have all these workarounds. We grep through our logs. It's not hard. We just haven't had the tools.
Right. So maybe, Charity, if I could ask a question about Honeycomb. I think you just celebrated an anniversary or something. Maybe the company is a year old now, 2 years old, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey going from where you were at Parse and Facebook, and then Honeycomb, and what has surprised you the most about the last 2 years?
We're still alive and thriving. Like, come on, I'm from ops. I'm always looking for the ways that we're going to fail. I 100% was like, yeah, we'll take the money. I didn't know how to engineer without this anymore. It had been so influential for when we got acquired by Facebook. We had built a system that was effectively undebuggable. And the journey of like making Parse a comprehensible platform seared into my brain that I no longer knew how to engineer without these tools that we had built and used. And so when I left Facebook, I looked around and like, surely the world's come a long ways, and it hadn't. And so I was like, well, fine, I'll take the money, I'll build the tool, we'll fail, I'll open source it, it'll be great, I'll never have to engineer without it again. I'm really not supposed to tell this story anymore. But like, that's where my expectation was. But the more we started to dig into what was special and what was hard and what was interesting, what was new, and we realized that none of the vendors, they all say that they're doing, the buzzwords exist in their website, but they aren't doing it, and their users know it. And there was a real hunger for this. So I'm actually just shocked. I'm surprised by that. It's gratifying, but we have a really big uphill battle just in education, like teaching people that they don't have to keep hitting themselves in the head every day, that it can be easy, that it can be better, that they can just get this out of the way and go on with their day, because it involves, we're having such a hard time just getting people to structure their logs. Just turn a string into a struct, that's all. And it's a big uphill battle. And I'm just like, really? I'm not going to be fighting this battle in 20 years. I don't know. I'm really stubborn, so I will be fighting this battle in 20 years. But, I prefer to move on to some other battles. But it's been amazing. Like, it's been so wonderful to just like build something that resonates with engineers, that makes a material difference in their lives.
Yeah, I guess no one wants to, at the end of the day, no one really wants to think about their logs or go searching their logs. So there's little incentive to do it well. If there's not much like payoff from doing it, but if you have a system where you can get that payoff and that benefit, then it becomes like useful and people want to do it.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the discussion, everyone. We're starting, we've got about 10 minutes left. So I want to ask one more question before we move on to picks. And we've, mentioned some papers, books, etc. Throughout the podcast. What would you recommend to someone who wants to learn about observability? What resources would you recommend for them to learn?
Adrian has a great site on Medium where he has pulled together all of the best writing. I'll get the link for the notes. It's probably the canonical source now.
Mm-hmm. There's obviously Honeycomb blog, I think Vivid Cortex blog, New Relic blog. They're all pretty good as well. There's some interesting articles in there.
Awesome. Well, is there anything more you'd like to say? Is there anything we haven't asked you that we should have? What do you two think?
I'm just really excited about the process that we've been going under for a while, but turning operators into owners, right? What do you need to own software? You need to have access to the repo. You need to have the constant like pushing out bits that get inside the software's head and explain it back to you. It's a better way of living your life. You care more. You're empowered. You have creativity. You have the range. And I say this, I know lots of software engineers who live their lives as operators too. They're just caretakers of someone else's code, and that's not how you should want to spend your life. And I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I think at Intercom we're all about giving our customers insight into their customers on a very like personal level to make it personal. And it was always frustrating that we didn't have that insight into our code, like that we could offer people for their customers. So I guess this kind of observability honeycomb type thing is like that. It's like something we know we want, and we're offering to people in a different way.
It's a very human-driven, experience-driven thing, right? It's we've had this idea of nines as being the ultimate, 5 nines. Oh, you. It doesn't actually matter. You can have 5 nines, and your people can be very unhappy with their experience. And we, as engineers, we kind of resist the idea that we should ever have to listen to anything subjective like user reports. But actually, that's the gold standard. That's the only thing that matters.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to both of you for your time. This is a very interesting emerging topic, and I've learned a lot today, and I'm certain our listeners have learned quite a bit too. Let's move on to what we always do at the end of the show, which are picks. This is something that what the panelists have found useful in their life in the past week or in the recent past, or interesting. It can be a technical tool, it can be non-technical, just things that we found useful that we think our listeners might as well. So with my picks, the first one is a game called War Games. Now it's not the 1980s movie, though it is based partly on it. It kind of updates it. But the most interesting thing about this game is the way it starts off kind of creepy and it says this is the game that watches you. I was like, okay, well I've got my camera covered, so that's something. But what it does is it's several different videos that are going on at once. You're getting multiple perspectives of the same conversation, and which ones you choose to focus on determine how the story carries out. So it's a really interesting dynamic where that I have not seen before, where you can influence the story just based on what you focus on. So that's available in iOS with the Echo app, EKO, or there's a version on Steam that's $3. I honestly recommend the one on Steam because the one on iOS has a lot of commercials in it, which they don't completely ruin it, but it is annoying to get a commercial in between two riveting scenes that you're very anxious to find out how they turn out. The other is related to the TV show Altered Carbon, which I recently finished the first season on Netflix. Now, I can't really discuss this very much without revealing any spoilers, which I'm certainly not going to do. But my favorite thing about it was this pink unicorn backpack that the main character gets in the first episode. And this is a very macho action oriented character, but throughout the rest of the season he's carrying around this pink unicorn backpack, and he's carrying around his weapons in it and all sorts of things, and it's so it seems so out of context that it makes sense in some way. It's a very interesting thing to watch to the show. And there's already subreddits about the significance of the pink unicorn backpack and all sorts of things. So whoever did the prop selection for Altered Carbon did a fantastic job. Jamie, let's go ahead and go to you next for picks.
Sure. I guess my pick would be a tool that we've found increasingly useful and has had a few changes recently which make it even better, and that's Build CI. It's like a bring your own infrastructure approach to testing and continuous delivery, and it really does free you up to do a lot more detail in how you set up your tests and how you scale, because you're bringing your own infrastructure, so you know how many processes you can run on the box, and it's super easy. They recently added automatic retries of test steps, which took a bunch of effort out of that as well. So yeah, definitely give them a go if you're in the lookout for some cool CI.
Nice.
All right, Charity, what about you?
Well, I'm kind of blanking. So I'm just going to say shout out to the place at the mall that replaced my iPhone screen for $10 in like 10 minutes. Didn't know they could do that. Way better than going to Apple.
Nice.
And I wrote a blog post last week that I will say that I'm like the next best kind of engineer. There's been all this talk about on-call stuff, right? And a lot of people get very depressed and burdened down. They're like, well, I'm supposed to like be on call for my own shit, and I'm supposed to know infrastructure, and I'm supposed to know design, I'm supposed to know all this stuff. Like, when does it end? Can I just write my code and go home, please? And I kind of wanted to counter that with first by just acknowledging that advice is like assholes. Everyone has one, and it's usually people giving advice based on their very specific situation and saying it very broadly because big statements are fun, right? And I see that the shift in this conversation is being very reflective of just the ideal engineer is changing, you know. And it used to be the ideal engineer who we all aspired to be was the DBA of the gods, you know, or the person who's the best in this very deep subject matter expert. And increasingly, the most valuable engineers are the ones who span boundaries, you know, who have at least a rudimentary knowledge of a discipline adjacent to theirs. And it's valuable because you're a translator. It's valuable because you can explain one side to each other and vice versa. And I just wanted to throw that out there because I feel like people they take it very personal, and I think that's a misinterpretation of what we're trying to say.
Thank you. And over to you, Nathan. What are your picks?
Sure. I guess I'll have 2 picks today. The first is DevOps Days Baltimore is happening next week. Depending on when you're listening to this, maybe it's already happened and you've missed it. But that's okay. There's another DevOps Days coming, so check out devopsdays.org. And then the other pick I'm going to select, I feel a little bit odd selecting this, and I'm primarily doing it so that maybe when I go back and listen to this episode, I'll listen to myself for this pick. That pick is sleep. I think sleep is something that is underrated, that probably most of us don't get enough of.
Last night, oh, damn it.
What's that?
I did not sleep last night. Now I feel very judged.
I can't say that I slept a whole lot last night either, Charity. So you're in good company at least, or in company anyhow. But I think that sleep is a really powerful thing that helps us all heal and live healthier lives. Again, I don't get nearly enough of it. So it's kind of bad advice coming from me. You should do as I say, not as I do, for sure.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to throw out OliCon 011 by con.io to save the date. We'll have registration up soon. And if you want to help us figure out what the next 10 years looks like, you should probably be there.
And that date is August 2nd, if I'm not mistaken, in San Francisco, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much to our panel. Nathan, would you like to close us out?
I sure will. Today is March 16th as we're recording this, so that means tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day. So happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone, or everyone who celebrates. Well, everyone should have a happy day. Whether or not you celebrate St. Patrick's Day, that's up to you. So happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Thanks a lot for tuning into this episode of The Food Fight Show. And until next time, keep it hot.